Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sylvia Goldman-Goodman. I'm the Executive Director of the Andrew Goodman Foundation, and we're very excited this afternoon to have a webinar called Put Your NSLVE Report to Work. Today, Adam Grismondi is going to be replacing, temporarily at least, Nancy Thomas, who unfortunately was called away but might come back. But in the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to Adam, who is going to take us through this webinar and then answer questions. Adam, take it from here.
Well, thanks to Nicole and Sylvia for having me and our office here today. Many of you, I think maybe in the past, have worked with Nancy Thomas, our director, or Isada Casillas-Connors, who's our associate director. We all sort of work hand in hand on a lot of these projects together. We'll go through some of the items that maybe you've seen before, and I'll be taking some questions at the end and then maybe open it up to some discussion around NSLVE reports. So you can see here on the slide in front of you my email address if you have any questions. I'll share that again at the end. But a little bit about myself, and then we'll go into the office. I handle a lot of our qualitative research here at the Institute for Democracy and Higher Education. I also do our research production and dissemination. In my background, I did my PhD in higher education at Boston College, and while there, I studied social media's impacts on college student civic learning and engagement. And I also serve as a part-time faculty member at the Boston University School of Education. And prior to my current work in this area, I worked in student affairs at University of Florida and Florida State University. So hopefully we have some things in common to talk about as we go through here. But to get started, here's some of the things we're going to do today. So first, I'll do a quick overview of IDHE, our office, and then we'll do a little bit of an overview of NSLVE, which is, of course, our major voting study. We'll do some digging into a sample report, individual campus report. We'll talk about our campus climate research and some of our findings there. And then we'll close with some notions around using elections as teachable moments. And like I said, I'll probably go through these somewhat quickly so that we have a lot of time for questions and discussion afterwards. So I thought before I jump in on the IDHE background, I thought maybe we could do some introductions of people that are on the call just so that we know who is here. And so if you could just introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and what your perspective is coming into this work. I don't want to call on people individually, but okay.
Hi, I'm Allison Twang. I'm the Associate Director at the Center for Civic Engagement at Binghamton University, and I'm the campus champion for our Vote Everywhere program. And so I have our NSLVE report here in front of us, and we're really excited to see that we had a over 10 percentage point increase in our student voting rate from 2012 to 2016. So we're sort of celebrating that and hoping we can continue that success.
Great, thank you.
Hi, this is David Goodman. I am the president of the Andrew Goodman Foundation. We're so happy to be associated with you and the NSLVE report and the fantastic work we do. We look at them very carefully for each school. And I was actually just in Binghamton with Allison a couple of days ago reviewing the work. And it's really important to have that NSLVE report to see progress year over year. And thank you very much, Adam, for working on this with us.
Great, thank you.
Hi everyone. My name is Alex Dennis from East Carolina University. I'm an assistant director in our Center for Leadership and Civic Engagement, and we have participated in NSLVE report for the last few years. We've been actually presented on it yesterday with our Student Affairs Executive Council. So there's a lot of work here at ECU going on, trying to increase our numbers and work with our action plan for next school year. So I'm excited to learn from all of you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Luis Sierra, and I am the new Assistant Director for Civic Engagement over at Tufts University's Office of Civic Engagement and Social Responsibility. I'm relatively new to the role. I've been in it for a little under 3 months, but I'm very excited for the aspect of it that deals with political engagement, much of which deals with the NSLVE results that we've gotten. We already have students who are very excited to go over them, understand the different parts of it, and how to be able to put them to work, especially as we look into the upcoming elections in 2018 and moving forward. So I'm very excited to be here and be part of this call to learn more. Thank you.
Hi all, just reading on behalf of Laura. She says she doesn't have access to a microphone on her computer, but her name is Laura Bentley. She's the coordinator in the Center for Civic Engagement and Learning at Case Western Reserve University in Ohio, and she's the campus champion for their Vote Everywhere team over there.
Great. Has anyone not had the chance to introduce themselves? That might be everyone. Okay. Great. So a little bit about our institute. So if you're not familiar with us, the Institute for Democracy and Higher Education is housed at the Tisch College of Civic Life up in Boston here at Tufts University. Kind of a unique structure. We, at Tisch, we're the only college of civic life in the country. So equivalent to maybe a college of arts and sciences or engineering, we have one that's centered around civic life. And our structure is we have a program side and a research side, and IDHE is one half of that, and Circle is the other one, and they focus on youth civic engagement. So in terms of our philosophy, we study and work to improve college student voting, campus conditions for political learning, political equity, and classroom teaching for democracy. We have several other areas of inquiry that we're looking at specifically. Our sort of next wave is climate studies, and looking at campuses that are doing a good job advancing political equity. At the moment, we also have a survey out on faculty, with faculty on academic freedom, free speech on campus, and looking at some of the hot button issues that are happening right now that really impact higher ed's role within American democracy. So right now we're in the process of identifying and supporting campuses that want to tackle this issue. At the end, I'll talk a little bit about some of the resources that we have, but we just released a new discussion guide, but we have several that are out there. We have some assessment tools, and we also offer coaching to college campuses as well as office hours. So if you have questions, we'll get a little bit into specifics on individual campus reports today. But if you want a little bit more in-depth time, we have half-hour blocks that you can reserve on our website, right on the front page, with an individual member of our team. It's usually our associate director, Isada, that would walk you through your individual campus report, but all of us are available. Also, if you're on Twitter, one of the things I do also for us is I manage our Twitter account. You can see our Twitter handle at the bottom. It's at Tufts IDHE. And then if you have specific questions for me, it's just my name, at Adam Gismondi. Okay, so one of the starting points for the work that we do is we see voting as fundamental and as something that can be measured objectively. And that's one of the reasons why it's really important. So voting as a construct for us, we see it as a proxy for student political engagement and interest in public affairs. So for us, it's not just strictly about like moving the rates. It's about what voting represents on college campuses. It's often a matter of equity. It's a matter of access. And that's part of how we approach the work that we do at IDHE. So if you have your campus report, which seems like everyone does, you'll be familiar with the image on the right there. That's sort of a sample snapshot of what you see in your 2016 NSLVE report. But broad overview of IDHE and NSLVE. NSLVE is the first objective measure of college student voting that exists. Much of the data prior to NSLVE is more based on personally reported information. So it's not necessarily measuring actual behaviors. It's looking at what people say that they're doing. NSLVE is a free service to campuses, but it's also a database for research. And one of the things that we're really proud of that came up in the wake of the 2016 election for us is you can now explore the data on our website. We now have a data portal, and it's idhe.tufts.edu if you want to check it out. This year, we also crossed 1,000 institutions participating in NSLVE. Every single state in America, in the United States, is represented. And we are over 9.5 million college student records for each election year. All in all, it constitutes about half of all current college students are members of NSLVE now. Okay, so we're going to go through an individual campus report, a sample one. This is a sample cover page of it. You can see on a couple of things I want to highlight here. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but this bottom right section where it says your students' voting data, those are the groupings of the breakdowns of that you'll have for your individual campus. One limiting factor for us in producing these reports is what data is reported to the college clearinghouse. If your institution gives the clearinghouse good data, then you get back good data in our NSLVE report, because that's what we're using to break down how voting looks on your college campus. If your front page of your NSLVE report doesn't have one or more of these categories, then you're not providing that info to the clearinghouse. And that's something that you can talk with your registrar about to change. So if you're missing race, ethnicity, or program of study, that's something that your campus can actually fix, and that in subsequent reports when we run it, we'll have that data to share. So here's sort of the overview page that you get in your campus's NSLVE report. Of course, at the top is the overall voting rate, and then the change from the 2012 presidential election year. And then over to the right there on the top right is the 2016 voting rate for all institutions. So just to give you a point of comparison, that's something that we've really been working to move towards, is that you don't get your data in isolation, that it's not, okay, so that's my rate, what does it mean? By giving you some comparison. And also this being the first year that we have data across 2 presidential elections, there's finally some comparisons that can be made. So we give you your 2012 data as well. So a couple things to highlight here. You see, of course, you have your registration rate. So that's of your students on campus eligible, the percent of people that have registered. In the middle column, we have the voting rate of registered students. So that's among those students that registered, that's the turnout of people that actually ended up voting. And then what we see as kind of the most important number is the overall voting rate. So that takes into account both registration and actual voting patterns. At the bottom, you'll see your total student enrollment. One thing to highlight here is that sometimes institutions are upset with their results, particularly if their voting rate went down. And that's something we caution you to kind of take action on too quick, like to not take action on too quickly, because there's certain things you need to look at. You need to look at this data in context. So for some campuses, like you could see on the sample report here, the total student enrollment actually dropped by 1,500. And there are a lot of reasons why that can occur. So for instance, one institution that we worked with, their school dropped a large graduate program. And as a result, the average age of students became much lower. And young people vote at lower rates than older students, so their rate naturally went down. And that became easier to identify because you see that the total student enrollment dropped. So we've also seen that happen where the rate drops when institutions add programs that attract more men, and men traditionally vote at lower rates. So make sure that you're reading the fine print and that you're not just reading your report in isolation. You have to kind of consider some of these contexts. So the last thing I'll highlight here on this front page is that you can see that we show how we adjust for international students, non-resident aliens, and that's in this first section here under total student enrollment. So we use IPED's data for this, and the way that IPED's report counts enrollment is different than the way that the clearinghouse does. So these figures are sometimes estimates. So if you think that there's some sort of discrepancy there, you can contact us directly about it. But oftentimes what we find is that because it's not fully reported by the institution, we have to do our best to just estimate. And so that's why sometimes it can cause some discrepancies there. There's also a process where you can recalculate the data individually on your campus, and that's sometimes something that the institutional researcher might want to do by changing the denominator. And on our website, on the NSLVE page, you can find instructions for how to actually do that. Okay, so like I said, there are different ways that we break out the NSLVE data in your campus report. One of the first ones is by age group. And you can see in the sample report here, it's pretty self-explanatory, but we break it down by 18 to 21, 22 to 24, 25 to 29, and so forth, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and then 50 and up. For a multitude of reasons, generally the older the voter, the more likely they are to vote. There are a lot, like I said, there are a lot of reasons for that. One of the questions that we often get is why does that doesn't necessarily hold in the 18 to 21 versus 22 to 24. And we're not 100% sure why that is, but there are some speculative reasons, including the fact that oftentimes colleges will target freshmen with voting, and in particular during the last during this last campaign season, campuses were we saw more movement in terms of having that be part of orientation. So, but that's something that we're still investigating. Another way that we break out our data, and this is pretty exciting, is by education level. And you can see here, we break it out undergraduate and graduate. Of course, for a 2-year institution, you likely would not have that graduate category, but for 4-year institutions, you would see this. Yeah, this is, post-baccalaureate degrees versus undergraduate. So there's not too much to explain here, but if there are any questions about that, we can come back to it. We also break out NSLVE data by undergraduate class year, so first year, sophomore, upperclassmen, and this terminology is, again, terminology that other organizations use that we have to work off of. But this is kind of interesting because you can kind of see on your individual campus who it is that's voting and how things are changing. And one of our goals, especially with the 2016 report, is to allow you many different perspectives on this. Because like I said earlier, it's not just about a raw number and then that's it. I mean, some campuses do view it that way, but there are a lot of reasons behind the numbers, and then by giving you different ways to kind of cut across, you might find more explanations for why students are or are not participating in the election. Another way that we break it down in your report is by enrollment status. So this, of course, is full-time versus part-time students. Part-time students tend to skew a little bit older, and so that explains some of what you see here in front of you. The next way that we break it down is by gender. Women traditionally vote at higher rates than men, which is no different in our report. We'll look at this a little bit when I go through some of the national trends that we saw, but not all campuses report gender data, and again, we're limited. We are given binary gender data, and so that's all that we can produce in our reports at the moment. That may change in the future, but we translate this out to your campus based on the data that's reported to us. Another way to break it down is by race and ethnicity. Once again, I'll add that this is, the categories are given to us. These are not categories that we draw up. In some instances that you can see here, we don't have enough data to report this. So in this sample report, we don't have enough in the Native Hawaiian / Pacific Islander category. But of course, you can see the 2012 versus 2016 voting rates among different race and ethnicities in this one. Okay, so field of study. This is something that in 2012 and in this most recent 2016 report, we found very interesting and actually very useful for college campuses to look at. One caveat that I'll add before we get into this is don't just look at the voting rates here. So if we look, for instance, on this one, health professions, you can see that the fairly high voting rate comparatively to some of the others here. In 2012 was 45.6%, and in 2016, 47.8%, which indicated a rise of 2.2%. And fairly significant numbers, actually, in terms of the student representation there. But if you look at a category like, let's say, parks, recreation, leisure, and fitness studies, the total number of enrolled students in that category in 2012 was 37, and in 2016, 47. So sometimes you might see a drop that looks precipitous, but it's actually a matter of less than a handful of students. So make sure that you're thinking about how many students are actually in it, because it's actually much more significant if you have a sample size of, let's say, 1,600 students versus 37 students. So that's something to think about. A trend that we've seen 2012 and 2016, a lot of the STEM fields have, this is just a sample report. This isn't our national numbers, but STEM fields, we've seen lower voting rates traditionally than some of the social sciences. And some fields we see very, very high voting rates. So education, library sciences, political science. And this is something that is definitely an area of interest and study for us. Some of it could be due to gender breakdowns, and some of it could be due to the way that the field approaches their material. So we do have some campuses that have been working to think about their professions in terms of civic relevance. So for instance, here at Tufts, we have a mathematics professor who has been doing really interesting work around gerrymandering and training undergraduates on what it looks like and how math plays a role in civic involvement. So there are a lot of really creative ways to approach this. Okay, so another way that we break this down is by Carnegie classification. So in this, you can see associate institutions, public institutions, private. And it's just some more comparison data for you to think about contextually. So generally speaking, that's our look at NSLVE. The next thing I'm going to go into a little bit here is Politics 365. So this is our work on campus climate for political learning and engagement on campus. And this really stems from, this is our qualitative data, essentially. And our qualitative data, I'll show you how it actually derives in some ways from our quantitative data of NSLVE. But you can see this in some of our publications that are up on our website, but this is our framework for our conceptual framework for this work. So you can see there in the center, that's the political learning and engagement climate. And the different areas that are part of this are human, cultural, structural, and political. And I think this will make a little bit more sense once I get into the actual data. So, okay, so this is sort of our normal curve here. And we, in starting this project, we looked at why some institutions are maybe more or less politically and electorally engaged. So there in the center, you see the actual voting rate. And this was designed based off the 2012 data. So we determined that campuses that fell within 29% to 65% were in the sort of normal curve of this. So what we did was we looked at the negative outlier campuses and then the positive outlier campuses. So for this, we said, all right, what campuses are performing better than we would predict based on their campus demographics? And we separated out those campuses that were positive outliers and negative. And then we actually visited about 10 of those campuses. So what did we find when we went to these campuses to see what was happening? Like why were these schools doing extraordinarily well or maybe underperforming what we would expect? So the first thing that we noticed was strong social cohesion among diverse student populations. So on these college campuses, there was a sense of shared responsibility among students for each other in the institution, a sense of collegiality, compositional diversity used as an educational asset. So like the diversity of the student body was seen as an indicator of success and as a way of making the learning environment better. There was cohesion that we saw across ideological and social diversity. And there was a very strong sense of care and student well-being, that strong interpersonal relationships were valued. And in particular, we saw that among student and faculty relationships. Another trend that we saw in campuses that were positive outliers were pervasive political discussions. So on these campuses, there was discussion-based teaching. There were political discussions that were held across campus. It wasn't something that was necessarily shied away from. And faculty and students were prepared to engage in these ways with one another. And they did this thing that is the ongoing issue in higher ed, which is they found that balance between free expression and inclusive environments. Academic freedom was seen as a given, but there was, there were cultures of free expression, but also recognizing what it meant to have inclusive spaces on college campuses. Okay, so another quality that we saw on these campuses were that students had a sense of agency, power, and shared responsibility. So students were not just given positions that were in name only. They actually had some positional authority. Students were respected for their views, whether or not they had positional authority. And a lot of these campuses had a strong student government association. Students felt like the decision-making process was not handed to them. It wasn't told to them. They actually had a place in these conversations, and that was important. The campuses that we visited also had a spirit of active political engagement. So what does that mean? It means that there was that traditional political participation. There was a buzz around election seasons, and that was something that people were excited about, and that there was an energy on campus for it. But it wasn't just the traditional side. There were activist students and organizing with or without student government. And largely we see that around issues. So not necessarily just political parties, partisan issues. It was across issues that maybe transcended politics at some time, or at least transcended partisan politics at moments. On these campuses, also the institutions could be classified as nimble. The faculty was supportive of students, and they saw political engagement as moments of learning. So to kind of summarize the different qualities that we saw on these campuses, Social cohesion, that included strong faculty and student relations. Diversity and equity was part of this intentional practice. This was embedded in the campus culture. There were pervasive political discussions across campus. Students were given voice and agency, and they had a role in institutional decision-making. And lastly, student activism and electoral engagement was just part of the culture on campus. So one of the outcomes of this work for us is a series of recommendations. We're going to be releasing a little bit more in this area as time goes on. But some of the, oh, and I'll just say that Nicole just sent a chat. Hopefully you all saw. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat box or wait for the Q&A. So we'll go back. Okay, so like I said, we have some recommendations that are coming out of our qualitative research, and we'll jump through some of these. So first recommendation that we have is to make sure that dialogue and deliberation is embedded on the college campus. So political issues can be seen as content, and it's across student learning experience. Elections should be used as a teachable moment. It's not the end-all be-all that it's just about the number that you get at the end of the day. And, you know, as the people that run NSLVE, we totally understand that perspective. There's a lot of value in saying, hey, we did this, and it's actually a really good moment of reflection, whether your numbers went up from 2012 or down, or, you know, when you look across different measures or indicators that you're really making inroads with students. And it's important to stop and celebrate those moments. We readily acknowledge that. But the reason that we call our qualitative data Politics 365 is because we see political learning and engagement as a 365-day-a-year endeavor. And that elections are moments where the spotlight is on this area. And so that's one of the reasons it's really important. But it's not just about that. It's about building a campus culture. Another recommendation that we have is to offer a core course. So teach students about facilitating discussions. We have several guides for this on our website if you need a starting place or some help. This is also something that if you want to call our office and sign up for office hours, we're always happy to talk you through that process. And then for some campuses, we work a little bit more in depth across, you know, months to years on helping them build up these programs. Another recommendation that we offer is to consider starting with the campus climate issue. So attitudes towards free speech and inclusion. Think about an assessment of your campus. Again, we have another tool that we're starting to roll out where campuses can perform a self-assessment and figure out where are we at with these issues and where can we go and where should we go. There are certain areas of civics that we think are a bit under-addressed or not addressed at all on campuses. And this extends into K-12 as well. If you look at the research from our peer office Circle, you'll see some of that there. But we encourage campuses to think about teaching social movements, community organizing, and deliberative democracy. These elements all play into the things that we saw on campuses that were outlier positive institutions for political learning. We also recommend supporting faculty development and discussion-based teaching, teaching from the news, current policy debates. There's some really great resources out there around teaching the news, and I think that what we've seen in the past year or so is a lot of resources have developed as a result of some of the confusion and the fast pace, I'll say, of the news cycle, particularly in the last year. Now, again, some of these recommendations don't apply to all campuses because we understand that there are different limitations and different contexts, but if possible, a recommendation that we have is to establish a hub or center for public problem solving. Again, this is probably a notion that some campuses can look at and say, like, we just can't do that. We don't see these recommendations as a cure-all for everybody, and we don't see them as prescriptive for success, but they're ideas and starting points. Encouraging and respecting student activism. You can look at case study after case study of student activism being ignored on college campuses, and ultimately that can be a big problem, actually. If you don't want to embrace it, it's important that it's acknowledged and that it's seen as an element of campus climate that needs to be addressed in some way. We also encourage campuses to be attentive to student well-being and inclusion, share responsibility with students for the institution and each other, and to use student disciplinary clubs to embed civic learning into disciplines. Like I said, there is real opportunity to be creative about thinking how different disciplines relate. It's not just about political science majors. It's not just about student government. Everyone's work has public relevance. So just to highlight a couple of things on our website, I know I've talked about some of the resources that we have. We have more than just this, but if you go to idhe.tufts.edu, you'll find all of these and more. One that I'll start with here is our Talking Politics guide. That's a guide for campus conversations about your voting reports. So when we talk about, so like in this webinar, we've really gone through what is the report, like how do I understand it, but you want to take the next step. There are two guides that I recommend in particular on this. So this guide, Talking Politics, that's in our resources section. You can also find it off of our NSLVE page. This is a full conversation guide that we've pulled out that helps you take your NSLVE report and use it to start conversations. That's not just leaving it in one person's hands, one person's office. We think that these reports, if campuses and report recipients are comfortable with it, it's really helpful to share them and to have conversations about it. It's step one is kind of being willing to publicly share it, and then from there it's important to build a dialogue around it and then think through where are opportunities for growth, and what are we doing well at acknowledging that as well. We also, in the top left, you can see we have IDHE reports on our website, which are sort of like white papers. We have one that's on using your NSLVE reports. And that's a pretty helpful guide that was written by our staff here that kind of goes through point by point of recommendations that we have of taking your reports and getting them out there. If you want to look at broad national trends, we do have our national report up on our website. It's called Democracy Counts. Kind of cheesy title, but we like it. It's, like I said, if you just go to the NSLVE portion of our website, it's right there on the front. We also have different resources for different topics. For instance, we have a section, if you go to the drop-down menu of resources on our website, we cluster our resources into categories, and one of them is free speech and academic freedom. So if you're struggling with controversial speakers on campus or finding that balance between free speech and inclusive spaces, we have some really, I think, important writing, a lot of new recent features by our director, Nancy Thomas, as well on there. So I can share all of these. We also have a newsletter that I'll highlight. We really do not inundate you. It's probably sent out once every 6 weeks or so on average. Sometimes if multiple issues are popping up, we might send one out a little bit more frequently than that. But in the newsletter, we usually highlight some really important work being done. If we think something that we've put out is important to share, we'll share it. But we also share our partner resources. If you have things you want to share that your campuses are doing, we're always welcome to collecting and sharing that. And we also share news stories that we're following. So if you're interested in that, or if you want more of a daily feed, we share every day at Tufts IDHE on Twitter news stories around topics of importance to the things that we've talked about today. If you want to encourage other people to sign up, which we're always welcoming, it's free, as you know. We have a link here to see if your campus is participating, or if you want to send it to a friend at another institution and recruit them, they can check if they're in already. If you don't have a copy of your campus report, or someone on your campus wants it, of course you can do that on our NSLVE website as well. So I'm going to pause there so that we have time for questions. Nicole, I don't know if anyone has sent any to you, or if we have any that people want to add, but If people have anything that they want to jump in, happy to chat. Otherwise, I also welcome, I'd like to really know how people are using their reports so far, if they are.
We don't have any comments in the chat right now, but if anyone wants to speak, just remember to turn yourself off of mute, or else we can't hear you.
We need to be on mute.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll toss out a question. Adam, what's the most creative way you've seen somebody use their NSLVE report so far, whether it be from 2016 or from the 14 or 12 elections?
So I was just down at William and Mary in Virginia, and I was talking with some folks in their civic engagement office and community work, and one of the people I spoke with was saying that it was really just like kind of the starting point for a staff meeting. It was just a conversation around like going through it as a team, and then that being the starting point for how we're doing. And I realized that's kind of a straightforward way of using it. But I think that being open in that way is really important because it can kind of spur some creative thought of, like, this isn't necessarily just one person's job on a college campus. Mm-hmm. It's about, like I said, building a culture of political learning. And I think that some of the best ideas come from there. We've definitely seen a lot of schools start to share them publicly on their website. We link to a few of them on our NSLVE page now in the sidebar. But we're kind of excited to see what happens. A lot of, like, our data portal on our website has gotten a lot of traction. We get a lot of traffic on there for people to kind of think about comparisons. So how are we doing not only compared to ourselves from 4 years ago, but you can look at different clusters that way. You can look at regionally the data. You can look at how you're doing in specific areas of your college campus. So I think that our goal is to kind of put it out there and see what people say. And we're working on our own research on the topic, but we're counting on the wisdom of the crowd here also to kind of think through the ways that this can be helpful.
Absolutely.
Can you hear
Do
me?
any of our
yeah, someone was just talking.
Yeah, this is Diane Bystrom. Can you hear me?
It's a little bit faint, but I can hear you.
I'm unmuted.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at State University, and just telling you, I did share the report that came to Iowa State with members of the student government, as well as the Andrew Goodman Foundation ambassadors, and I also shared it with the ISU Democrats because they asked for a copy. Then I wrote a story about the study for our November newsletter that we send out, and that was picked up on social media by a couple people. But I have to tell you, and I'll just email you, Adam, afterwards, is that I had trouble writing a story from the report because the N of students seemed to shift with Iowa State. So at some point I could tell when I was trying to go through the report and talk about women and majors and older students and graduate students, the bottom end, the thing that we were dividing seemed to be changing. At one point it was, I could correlate it to what you were saying as our student enrollment, but then later it seemed to be a different number.
Mm-hmm.
Finally just left that out of the story. I was confused about it, but I've been traveling and I don't have the report in front of me now, and I had hoped to have it here, but it would be something that I can just send you on your own. But what I was finding is that the number of students that were going into the percentages being shown shifted from our enrollment was pictured. That was some of the, and then later on in the report, especially like, for example, gender, it seemed like there was a different number that was counted in there. And I could not figure it out for the life of me. And I deal with statistics. I do quantitative research, and I just couldn't figure it out. So I didn't want to, I wanted still to story, but I felt it kind of turned out kind of confusing from my end, and I
Mhm.
Being someone who does quantitative research, I need to understand it better, and I will just send you a follow-up email when I get time, hopefully before the next meeting.
Yeah, so I'd have to look at it individually just to double check on this. But if you're interested, I definitely encourage you to sign up for one of our office hours block where we can go through it individually with you. But I suspect that there were probably two different ends. So the overall one and then the individual, and that relates back. We explain it a little bit more in depth on our website, but that relates to the non-resident alien issue, and it's a reporting thing. So that it causes some discrepancy in just on the student-to-student numbers versus the overall campus aggregate numbers, and it's a little bit complicated, but basically it goes back to the way that campuses report their data. But someone can like spend a half hour going through the very specifics of it with you, if you're open to it.
So I just go to your website and look for something for office hours.
Sorry.
How do I sign up for office hours?
So if you just go to idhe.tufts.edu, there's one main story highlighted, and then right below that we have a link to office hours, and you can just pick a time that works for your schedule right on there.
I can send that link out when I send the recording from this and the slide notes, the slides themselves. Thanks for that question, Diane. I wanted to read off a question we got in the chat from Bob Friegau at Elon University. He asks, Adam, will you be releasing an NSLVE report after the 2018 midterm elections, or does your study focus only on general election years?
Thanks for that question. We do anticipate that we will be releasing campus reports for the 2018 midterm elections, and also a national report that year. And as you saw with the 2016 data, the one thing I'll say is that it takes some months for the data to be recorded in the national data, and then we need to match that with the student data. So usually there's some lag time of half a year worth of months. So probably mid 2019 we would be releasing campus reports and a national report for the midterm elections as well. But yeah, thank you for that question. I know we have a lot of campuses that are working on the 2018 midterm elections now, and there are definitely some resources up on our website that you can check out about the 2014 data and the types of things that campuses have done in the past to get ready for midterms.
Anyone else have any questions to ask of Adam while we have him here on the line?
Hi, this is Allison at Binghamton. This may probably be a question that I would also sign up for an office hour appointment with, but I just kind of wanted to share with the group one of the challenges that we're facing in using the report to inform the voter engagement work on our campus is that we have a really high percentage of international students, like 16%. So any of our numbers that are broken down by the different categories are really skewed. So I'm wondering, like, to what extent we can even rely on these numbers to inform work that we're doing, because we do have such a high percentage of international students that it's not like, I don't think our numbers are off a little. I think they're off a lot when it comes to these breakdowns. But I'm not quite sure like how we should go about sort of assessing to what extent we can really rely on these numbers and use them to inform some of the work that we're doing.
So really the one of the things that we, it's one of the reasons I keep harping on this. We are definitely limited by what campuses report. So working with your campus registrar around making sure that as complete data as possible is reported to the College Clearinghouse, that really helps us to ensure accuracy. But yeah, we can, I think this would be a great area to drill down on if you have time to jump on a phone with us for office hours, because then we can look individually at your campus and help determine your individual situation on that.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Nicole, I think you are muted if you're talking.
I am. I felt trapped to my own devices. I was saying we probably have about enough time for one or two more questions. It's about just before 4:45 or 4:55 at this time. So if anybody has anything left they want to ask of Adam, he's a fantastic resource and we have him on the line right now. So please do ask questions or share how you've been using your NSLVE report to the group.
If no one else has any other questions, I did want to just kind of, there's one point that sometimes we talk about in our office that I think is relevant to the work of the Andrew Goodman Foundation. So you can see the full national report on here, but one of the things that we try to encourage people to think about is that it's not just about voting generally, it's about who votes. And one of the things that we and Circle, our peer office, have found is that politicians, the people that they contact and try to encourage to turn out to vote are the people that have voted in the past. And so basically, getting registered and going out and voting is part of making yourself, making the political, powers that be become invested in different populations. And so if you look at things like wealth in this country, high-income Americans vote at way higher rates than low-income peers. And median wealth for a member of Congress is much higher than the average family. 90% of the nation's 40,000 elected officials are white. Part of the issue at hand, as we see it, is, like I said, it's not just about voting, it's about who votes. And to encourage our college students to get invested and think about being part of the political process, part of this is making sure that we have a representative government. And so this is something that we're thinking a lot about in our office, and it's something that the Andrew Goodman Foundation has done a lot of really excellent work on, thinking of issues of equity and how voting plays into this. So I think that's a fine point to leave on, but I'd like to thank you all for being part of this conversation today too.
So thank you very, very much for joining us today, Adam. Just a point of note to everybody on the call, I will send a recording of this, or a link to a recording of this, probably going to put it on our YouTube channel, as well as the slides, a link to sign up for office hours with someone at the IDHE, and I will put contact information for Adam in that email as well. So please do keep your eyes open for that and follow up in whatever ways are going to support you, your campus team, as well as your institution be more civically engaged and have ever improving voter turnout in the 2018 election and onward. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Adam, for talking and telling us all about how to use our NSLVE reports, and we'll hopefully be putting them to good use in 2018 as we approach the midterm elections.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks everybody who joined the call.
Well, have a fantastic rest of your day, everybody. Keep an eye out for our email, and we look forward to continuing to work together.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.